Well, that brings us to today's subject, which is telecommunications. And as I was thinking about this, I thought about how much the internet has impacted our lives. I remember back when I first started in this side of the business, how hard it was to get information. Because before the internet, you had to call somebody and figure out which department to call, and then you had to figure out what to ask for, and then you had to go downtown and get it. Very difficult to do the research, much more inefficient. And then we got Prodigy and CompuServe, and that was great because you could go online and people could email you studies and research and data. Made our jobs a lot easier. And then the World Wide Web came about, and people were putting information online, and it opened up a whole world of possibilities. But even now, the internet's still impacting our businesses, and we've seen what's happened in journalism and the entertainment industry. But in terms of our budget, we're going to have a very difficult budget. We're getting ready to start our legislative session next year. Telecommunications has a great impact on a lot of areas where the state spends money. We were lucky enough to hear just 2 months ago at the State Policy Network annual conference in Asheville, Clayton Christensen is a Harvard professor who specializes in the area of disruptive innovation. He's looked at how the internet and computers have been disruptive innovators in many different areas. And he's most recently focused his efforts on education and how individualized, customized online education is going to completely disrupt K through 12 education. He believes not only will it increase quality, but it could reduce the price that we pay for the K-12 education down to about a third of what we're spending today. Huge implications. Their state budget, over half of that is education. And in his book, Disrupting Class, that was published last year, he mentions Georgia as one of the states that is a great leader in this area of online education. Both our technical colleges and Department of Education and charter schools that we have providing virtual education. In addition to blended education, we have a teacher in the classroom, but you're using online resources. Combine that with a thriving video game industry here in Georgia, we've got a real opportunity for our state. Second, healthcare. The state spends a lot of money on healthcare. You heard a couple months ago, there's a Georgia company, Georgia Healthcare Leadership Council, one of the first companies in the country that's going to allow individuals to get the true price, market average price, on any kind of healthcare service. Doctors, hospitals, medical procedures, the actual market average price, not what people are saying they're charging, but what people are actually paying. Huge impact to transform healthcare and lower costs and improve quality. Something that I think has been a little bit lacking in the federal healthcare discussion. Also, telemedicine, starting to help more and more rural Georgians. And devices like the diabetes phone, you've heard Newt Gingrich talk about. Those are realities now. It can really impact chronic disease. All depend on telecommunications. And finally, transportation. We were talking about that in our table. I'm sure we'll be talking about that in the next few months while the legislature is here. And I know Senator Stoner is here with us today, and he spent a lot of time on the transportation issue. But telecommuting is a great way to reduce demand on our roads. And I don't know if you remember the days of video conferencing when it wasn't really quite there. It was jerky and just really annoying. Now, nearly all of our laptops, you buy a laptop, comes with a embedded camera and very good quality video conferencing. Well, the future, and this is even old technology, if you Google Cisco telepresence, you can see a demonstration where John Chambers, I think he's in Dubai, and one of his partners is maybe in Boston, and a hologram of his partner walks onto the stage and answers some questions and has an ongoing discussion with John Chambers halfway around the world. That's the future. And so that has a great impact on transportation. So there are all these areas, but it's going to require a huge amount of investment. And that means we've got to get the federal policies right, and it's going to mean we have to get the state policies right, because there's a limited amount of money, and that money is going to go to the states that get their policy decisions correct. So I can't think of anyone better to discuss that issue than our speaker today, George Gilder. He is an internationally acclaimed author, economist, technology guru, and venture capitalist. He's the author of 15 books, including the international bestseller Wealth and Poverty, published in 1981 and voted by National Review as one of the most important works of the 20th century. Now, I remember reading that back then, and one of the first really serious books that I had read, and just been intrigued with the way he explained economics, and I've been following his work ever since. In 1989, he wrote the book Microcosm, which Wired magazine voted as the second most important book of that era, talking about how computers were going to impact our economy. And then in 2000, he wrote Telecosm, How Infinite Bandwidth Will Revolutionize Our World, talking about how telephone and video was going to be moving to the internet, and not only the challenges of that huge volume of information, but what opportunities that we've seen. That was in 2000. Here we are a decade later, and we're seeing the reality of what he predicted. He was awarded the White House Award for Entrepreneurial Excellence by President Reagan in 1986, and actually, in studying Reagan's speeches during that time, he was the most quoted living economist, quoted in all of Reagan's speeches. He is now a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute, where he directs their programs on high technology and public policy. He is a contributing editor of Forbes magazine and a frequent writer for The Economist, The American Spectator, the Harvard Business Review, and many others. He just published a book called The Israel Test, which you can pick up at Barnes & Noble, which is another fascinating book. But please help me welcome our speaker today, George Gilder.
Thank you. This has been quite a saga, this story of the Telecosm, the unfolding of telecommunications capabilities over recent years. And at times we've become overwhelmed with the problems that face us. You know, all these scarcities that seem to be emerging. But I always say, don't solve problems. When you solve problems, you end up feeding your failures, starving your strengths, and creating a costly mediocrity. Don't solve problems. Pursue opportunities. And the wonderful thing about information technology and telecommunications is that most of your raw materials are abundant. Memory chip capabilities are still increasing vastly. Hard drives, now you get a terabyte for $99, just an awesome, incredible abundance of storage capabilities. And bandwidth is booming, and it's just tremendous abundances. And the question always is, when you're in an industry and in an era of abundance, what is the constraining scarcity? Because economics works in a kind of dialectic between abundances and scarcities, with the abundances providing opportunities and the scarcities constraining and channeling them. And what is scarce when everything else is abundant? And I believe that in an era of general abundance, the pressure of scarcity migrates to the residual resource when everything else is abundant, and that residual resource is time. And it's I've always summed it up as the speed of light, which is kind of the hardware constraint that imposes itself on all communications tools, and the span of life, which is the biological constraint that faces all of us. In business, it really translates into the customer's time, and all of us in information technology are trying to economize on that speed of light and the latencies that it inflicts, and the customer's time, which is really the focus of the services that you employ. And so this whole story of the saga that brings us to our current situation is summed up in Bill Lowry's book here, which he gave me, called Political Will, and it tells the whole story from a technological point of view. The history is ordinarily told in terms of generals and politicians and statesmen and diplomacy and force, but really, finally, it comes down to technology and invention as the key force that propels history. And in my new book, The Israel Test, I focus on the Second World War and the contribution that Jews in particular made to the success of the West through the Manhattan Project, and which really won the Second World War. And technology really is the driving force. But when I wrote Telecosm in the year 2000, I was full of enthusiasm about the promise, but at the same time, as the book came out, we experienced just this appalling telecom crash. The Telecosm crashed. I thought it crashed on my head, but the rest of you all thought it crashed on your heads. But anyway, this was really an appalling disaster around the year 2000. Destroyed some $3 trillion of high-tech market capitalization and inflicted devastating blows on this industry and bankrupted thousands of companies. It was an economic disaster comparable to the one we've just been through in finance, with the difference that the crash of 2000 actually was directed against the heart of economic growth and innovation that Bill Lowry writes about here. And that is the sources of technology advance. The venture capital supported companies produce something like 20% of GDP directly, and 10% of all jobs in the economy. And this is just the immediate effects, but the technologies that they launch and sell to telecommunications companies, in turn, increase the productivity of everything else in the economy. So this crash of 2000 really was a devastating blow, and one might have expected it to set back the industry catastrophically. So what's happened since the year 2000? First of all, during the year 2000, it was widely believed, there were lead stories in various publications that said that the 2000 crash was attributable to a glut of bandwidth. There was too much communications power out there, and it brought about the crash of 2000. But I think the heart of it was over-regulation. The real cause of this crash was not a glut of bandwidth, but a dearth of connectivity. And the dearth of connectivity was imposed by these unbundling rules that forced investors in new capability to share their facilities with their competitors. And if you can imagine a device better designed to discourage investment, it's hard to conceive of it. if you invest, then you have to give it to your competitors seems to be kind of negative. And it did indeed first summon lots of competitors. You know, all these thousands of CLECs rose up and absorbed lots of investment funds and bought lots of equipment, but still didn't address that last mile dearth of connectivity, which rendered most of these investments futile and bankrupted thousands of companies in the aftermath. So it's now 2009, and in the interim, this crash had some kind of impact on regulation, and the FCC declared broadband, at least, to be an information service and thus exempt from these rules that proliferate across 50 different states and 50 different PUCs and all the various government bodies that affect the performance. And what's happened, despite these two crashes, what we've had is a bandwidth miracle in the United States. When in 2000 the United States was falling behind. You remember all the lists. We were numbered 18 in penetration. We were failing all over the place. Europe was outperforming us. Asia was leaping miles ahead. And what's happened since 2000? The U.S. completely turned it around. Broadband became the most rapidly adopted technology in history, more than radios or automobiles or television or CDs or DVDs or whatever you want. Internet, computers, PCs, laptops, iPods, nothing grew as fast as broadband since the year 2000, from 2% of the American population to 60% of the American population now. This is just an incredible trajectory. And residential bandwidth has risen 54 times since the year 2000. And wireless bandwidth, this is capability, wireless bandwidth has risen 542-fold, 542 times. And this means you get the residential wireline bandwidth and the wireless, and it comes out that overall communications capabilities in the United States since the year 2000 have risen 91-fold. And this is accompanied by an immense surge in traffic, up some 1,000-fold. So now we talk in exabytes. Exabytes are 10 to the 18th, and we're now experiencing an exaflood of data. And an exabyte is about 50,000 libraries of Congress, 50,000 LOCs in an exabyte, and we're doing exabytes a month now. And as a result of this bandwidth explosion, you had also an explosion of values in information technology. Google could not have become the company it is without this huge expansion of bandwidth. Google's totally dependent on the deployment of bandwidth. Facebook, MySpace, eBay, Apple, all these companies have had their heyday because of this bandwidth miracle that was really unleashed by deregulation. Meanwhile, what happened in Europe, where they actually started re-regulating, and they were so enthusiastic with their advances that the government decided to take them over in many European countries, and their bandwidth is actually stagnated during this period. It's risen about less than a tenth the speed of U.S. bandwidth advance. And what made this possible? I mean, this is amazing, an amazing development in the face of the crash of 2000. What made it possible was an awesome level of investment. This was it was seen that the Telecosm still, because of this calculus of abundances and scarcities, that this still was the big arena of opportunity in America, and some $3.5 trillion of new investment flowed into communications and information technology investment between 2000 and last year. So, in 2008, there was $455 billion of new investment. I don't know, it maintained a pretty strong level in 2009 as well. So, so this has been a just tremendous success story. So, of course, in Washington, they want to take it over and make sure that this tremendous success is more fairly distributed in some way. So that, and that in Washington there's this horrible terror that maybe some packets are being treated differently on the internet than other packets, and that this discriminatory treatment of internet packets threatens freedom of speech and the national defense and the prosperity of Google and other crucial national goals. So network neutrality is being proposed, and this would mandate that all packets be treated equally, and bars differentiation among them, and differential charges for different packets. Packets infected by viruses, packets that require special treatment, packets that come in volatile, unpredictable spikes cannot be treated differently from other packets. And this network neutrality concept just really could bring this whole expansion to a halt again, because it's an invitation for endless litigation. What's neutral? What packets can be treated differently? How do you charge for different internet services? All these issues that have been resolved readily by the various enterprises involved will now become a matter of law if we have a network neutrality bill enacted. It would be kind of a cap and trade for the internet, you know, and a carnival of lawyers, because discrimination is not determined by law. Discrimination of packets or differentiation of them, or it's determined not by the laws of the land, but by the laws of the Telecosm. What really determines whether you're going to throw away packets or carry them in limos is how much bandwidth there is. And what if bandwidth is scarce, you got to regulate packets. There's no other possibility. That's why we have the best efforts internet, which emerged during a time of bandwidth scarcity. And in order to have network neutrality, you need vast bandwidth, and that is determined by whether Wall Street will support further investment in bandwidth expansion. If you impose some sclerosis of network neutrality, investment in bandwidth expansion will be reduced. So, of course, you'll have more discrimination among packets and more packets thrown away, and that's just law. It's not a. And it doesn't matter what the politicians say or want. That's what determines network performance and equality of access. It's all determined by the levels of investment and the valuations of communications carriers that Wall Street will sustain. That's what determines network neutrality. There are people who, and this follows, incidentally, Irving Kristol's law, that the unintended effects of social policy are always much more important and usually much less appealing than the intended effects. So, and network neutrality is a perfect case in point. It also involves restrictions on something called deep packet inspection that the Washington folks find deeply menacing, that little chips can actually read internet packets proceeding at hundreds of millions of packets a second, can actually identify the contents in these packets as they proceed through the routers and treat them differently. And so deep packet inspection is considered to be a menace. And deep packet inspection is not a menace. It's a tremendous technological feat, an awesome technological feat, which will be important not only for cloud computing and all the other vast changes that are underway on the internet today, but which make it run smoother and better and more resourcefully. But deep packet inspection is also critical for identifying viruses and denial of service attacks and threats and keeping some consciousness of the contents of what flows through the net. And companies like NetLogic that actually can produce these tremendous feats are important contributors to the future of American defense and actual robust network that can survive attack and prevail. So, and this is not a matter just of having America's defenses really have been dependent for decades on information technologies that haven't been classified particularly, that have been produced in huge volumes commercially. That's really been the heart of the U.S. defense. Even way back in earlier days, we couldn't really compete with the Soviet Union in bureaucratized, classified, secret industrial projects. I mean, the Soviet Union exploded a hydrogen bomb before we did. They did Sputnik before we did. We really were struggling in our secret, bureaucratized kind of research and development to compete even with the Soviet Union. What allowed us to prevail in the Cold War was the mostly commercial efflorescence of innovation in information technology that came so fast and so overwhelmingly that the Soviet Union couldn't even begin to keep up with it. And it was all the all the weapon systems we talk about today, drones and predators and anti-missile systems and all these command and control equipment and satellites and all this stuff is all really an outgrowth of your industry and the computer industry. And that's the, and so when you decide to stop companies from doing deep packet inspection, you don't just shift this to a classified channel or something where advance continues at the same pace. You actually cripple the progress in the industry. So I think that we are at a crucial point again, like the point earlier in the late 90s where we kind of re-regulated telecom, and we're now contemplating a new re-regulation. We got all kinds of people up in Washington who are just devout regulators, devoutly believe that they could make better decisions than you guys on the future of communications and computing. In the face of, you know, that this $3.5 trillion of new investment. So, but we really, Georgia, to get to Georgia too has a kind of moment of truth here, because Georgia has been lagging in deregulation. Our report, this Discovery Institute report, it's smaller than Bill's book, but it has some useful content in it nonetheless. It's a Discovery Institute report on Georgia's unfinished telecom agenda, and it's available to all of you, right? And that shows that you know, you're way behind Alabama. That should be a wake-up call. And deregulating telecom, and so it's a tremendous opportunity. The Bob Crandall of Brookings has done a study where they've calculated that hundreds of billions of dollars of new efficiencies can be achieved through broadband and investment over the next 5 years. It's and that translates to a direct stimulus in Georgia of some 3.3 billion and an indirect 3.9 billion more, all in lower prices for voice and internet services and communications, and 70,000 some jobs a year. All these can be achieved through deregulation of communications in Georgia, and that is it's really important. These jobs, by the way, are a lot cheaper than the stimulus jobs that they're packaging up in Washington, which cost millions of dollars per job if they can actually identify it. These telecom jobs are about $50,000 per job, and if you invest in broadband, $5 billion in broadband, you'll yield 100,000 jobs in telecom and IT. So this is a great opportunity for Georgia, and Discovery Institute's got it all pinned down here, and how you can catch up with Alabama and unleash a new economic boom across the state. Thank you so much.
We've got time for some questions.
Is there a favorite question you'd like to see that?
What's a legitimate goal in 1 year and 5 years for Georgia?
1 year and 5 to do what?
A legitimate goal within 1 year for Georgia and within 5 years, as you talked about deregulation and the impact on.
Well, the details are in this report here. that we've done, that Hans Haney and I have done. One year, it's hard to do a lot in 1 year, but in 1 year you get started. But the projections that Bob Crandall did go over 5 years, and 70,000 new jobs a year for 5 years, approximately. And he actually said 71,059 jobs. I don't know. It struck me as a little more accurate than his data probably could sustain. But anyway, it's better than those 8 million stimulus jobs.
What do you say is the biggest impediment to deregulation in Georgia?
I think just the entrenchment of the old rules across the state, and a lot of companies, a lot of the rural carriers charge 4 times more for intrastate calls than for long distance calls. I mean, there are just lots of kinds of interests that will squawk if there's true deregulation enacted. But it's still worth doing, and that's the problem with politicizing an industry. It's very hard to deregulate once you have a regulatory scheme implanted, and it.
We're hearing a lot about cloud computing from IBM and other companies these days. Spend a moment and tell us the relationship between your expanded broadband and the impact that may have on the success or failure of cloud computing as presented these days.
Yeah, well, I wrote one of the first articles on cloud computing in Wired about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's what cloud computing really accomplishes, and it's not an exaggeration. It means that every smartphone can effectively command supercomputer powers. That's the essence of what it does. It means that in a company that I'm currently investing in, the most advanced and challenging games that today only can be played on super overclocked and hyped up computers costing many thousands of dollars can be played on any smartphone device, and with no latency. Or this is and if you can do that with interactive 3D game technology, you can imagine what you can do to video teleconferencing. And that is really the heart of the next generation, is the emergence of video teleconferencing as the modal kind of technology on the net. It doesn't mean that these video bits are more important than any other bits, but it means that in terms of the technology that's deployed, they will define the network increasingly, because if you can really do robust video teleconferencing, everything else can ride along as an almost unnoticeable kind of burden. So that what cloud computing can do is just vastly increase the amount of bandwidth that is used across the network. And it really does allow a return to old telecom models. If you're doing video teleconferencing, you need a synchronous network. And you need to abandon a lot of the internet practices. And so as the new network is deployed and optimized for video teleconferencing, it will allow it will be a black hole that will absorb all other kinds of communications and permit the old telecom model to be revived. And this is something I've been predicting for a long time. But now a guy in China named Henry Gao has written Telecosm for China, explicitly saying that I was right about this. And they've got the Chinese government involved. That's probably a negative. But anyway, they're building this network that's optimized for broadband video interactive telecommunications use, and they believe that this is a much better model than trying to upgrade existing IP networks to do multimedia in various complex ways. And it's better to create a network that does the 3D video teleconferencing through the cloud, and thus can create an entirely new and better infrastructure.
One more. Back in the back.
Right now, there's a lot of discussion about bandwidth restrictions over wireless. And AT&T, for example, some of which I think Jeff Watson and others to solve quantum technology. But I also wonder if some of the means we use like a spectrum is kind of...
You have to talk a little louder, I think. It's shift to wireless.
Right, with the wireless, right now we're hearing an awful lot about bandwidth, lack of bandwidth in wireless. All the available bandwidth is being absorbed.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. The bandwidth crisis in wireless is that wireless isn't optimized for video, and I think that the next generation of wireless will probably not be exactly on the LTE track, a long-term evolution track, which optimizes wireless channels to the Shannon limits and still won't really accommodate video. And if you can't accommodate video, the investment that the new 4G entails won't really repay the expense. So it seems to me that the new model that will emerge will have to move the antennas closer to the user. There's going to be lots of femtocells and very local broadband capabilities linked to fiber optic lines. The model of having big cell sites with over large distances will steadily erode in coming years. That there's going to be much more emphasis on getting fiber as close to every antenna as possible, and then have an array of what they call femtocells, little antennas that can, because they're close to the user, can handle video and anything else. And so that's a better model than squeezing every last Shannon bandwidth out of the existing cellular infrastructure.